welcome to the BRIC's very first hybrid program. So we're excited to try this out. I'm hoping everyone on Zoom can see us. Hi. My name is Jillian Robbins, and I'm the head of the Business Resource and Innovation Center. And I don't like to play favorites, but my favorite topic is the business side of it, as I was a business supervisor as well. And legal services are so important to businesses, especially when you're just getting started. So has anyone been here physically in person before? Anybody's first time? What was that? Is this your first time here? Awesome. So the Business Resource and Innovation Center serves businesses, of course, as well as nonprofit professionals, job seekers, and inventors. We have this amazing space that's open and available. We're not a quiet space. We like to program the space, and we encourage collaboration. We have meeting rooms behind us on the other side of the space where you can come, you can work with a group of 2 or more, and you can also take Zoom meetings. We also have PCs available and lots of great specialized databases, resources, and classes for each of our services. I also want to do a quick plug for one of our most popular programs, which is free headshots. We offer these every single month on the first and third Thursday of the month from 1 to 3. This month, we're really excited to collaborate with our rare books department here on the 3rd floor. And you can get your headshot and taken in front of some beautiful leather-bound books, lots of mahogany, and a big wooden ship above your head as well. So that's really special, and that's October 6th and October 20th this month. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the BRIC's friend, Zane Jonson here. He is the owner and founder, managing attorney of MZA Legal. And we're thrilled to have him talk to you today about why you need legal services when you're starting your business.
All right, thank you, Jillian. I'm going to stand on this side of the computer, so hopefully it makes it a little, or this side of the monitor, so hopefully it makes it a little bit easier for everyone who's on Zoom to hear me. Typically, I would do questions throughout, but since we've got folks on Zoom, for those of you in the room, if you have any questions as I'm going through, feel free to stop me. But for those of you on Zoom, any questions that you have, go ahead and throw them in the chat, and I'll try to get through as many of them at the end as possible. So this is Keeping Your Business Legal. Welcome. And I'm excited, very excited to be here at the Free Library. For any of you who couldn't hear Jillian, the gist of what she was saying is there are a lot of great resources here at the BRIC. So come on down and check it out. All right. And I can vouch for and attest to that, both as a presenter now, but also as someone who's used the BRIC, for my own business and some of the resources that are here. So check it out. But today we're talking all about keeping your business legal. And this is really a workshop not designed to help you be your business's own lawyer, but to really help you to realize and kind of set the differences between understanding when you have a legal issue that your business, where you might need a lawyer, and when you have a legal issue where maybe it's something that you can kind of figure it out on your own. Go ahead.
Sorry for the first question. It's early. Is this going to be recorded so we can get it back to it?
Yes, it is.
So no notes.
No, well, I mean, you may want to take notes, but you don't have to. You can always check back on it later. So, so again, my name is Zane Jonson. I'll just start by introducing myself a little bit. I got to change this slide. Now that we're like back, so on Zoom, it's kind of different because you've got the slide and like I'm like this little floating head on a Zoom box, and now that I'm like standing next to myself, maybe I don't need a life-size image of myself, but that's besides the point. My name is Zane Jonson. I'm the founder, managing attorney of MZA Legal. We're a Black-owned virtual law firm that's based here in Philadelphia and focuses on helping new entrepreneurs, freelancers, small business owners set a solid foundation for the future growth of their business. And so really for me, I went out and started this firm because I really wanted to help new entrepreneurs figure out how to set that legal foundation that not only keeps them protected from risk, but also puts them in a position where they're ready to take advantage of new opportunities as they present themselves, right? Because one of the things as a new entrepreneur, particularly as a solo entrepreneur, if you don't have any business partners, it's just you, you're kind of trying to manage things. As things start to grow, and that growth will eventually come as you're working through it and you're being consistent. As that growth comes, so many people experience, well, here it is, and maybe I'm not ready for it, right? Maybe it's that contract from a corporation that's like, okay, we want to pay you through your LLC. It's like, oh, I don't actually have an LLC. Or Maybe it's that situation where you're getting so much business that you're ready to hire someone else to help you manage some of that business, but you're not sure whether you can hire them as an independent contractor, or do you need to hire them as an employee? Or you're looking to start a new business and you've got a business name, but you realize that it looks similar to something that somebody else has out there. And so should you get a trademark registered? Can you wait? Should you switch your business name now before you get started and have to switch it later? So these are all of the different questions and situations that can pop up, and many more. And we're going to kind of go through them. And again, my goal today isn't to put you in a position where you can necessarily be your own lawyer or be your own attorney. You want to have a professional who you can reach out to, just like with finances, just like with marketing, whatever the case may be. But to put you in a position where you can kind of spot some of these issues as they come up and get out in front of them before they become bigger issues. So the roadmap for today, and we've got 60 minutes. I usually do this in an hour and a half, but we've kind of truncated it down a little bit. So we've got the 5 kind of main areas that I want to cover, and that's entity formation, business licensing, contracts, initial hiring issues, and then intellectual property we'll finish it off with. And so I'm excited. There's going to be a lot of information in here that hopefully, if not all of it is relevant to you, there's going to be something in here that you can grab and that's relevant to you for your business. But can I just I want to ask really quick, both to those who are here in person and those who are here on Zoom. In person, we'll do by a show of hands. On Zoom, you can just put a yes or a no or Y or N, or raise your hand. I can actually see that. But how many of us are current business owners? Have started a business already? All right. We got one hand on Zoom. And then how many of us, I'm guessing the rest of us are aspiring business owners. Just raise your hand. Okay, so we've got an aspiring business owner. I see some more hands going up. All right. So for everyone, this workshop, again, is really geared towards new entrepreneurs. So it's going to kind of help you figure out the foundational aspects. And that's starting with business formation. So forming a business entity. All right. And we're going to go through and look at the 4 main entity types. Those are sole proprietorships, partnerships, LLCs, and corporations. And I don't want to just tell you about them. I want to actually give you information that you can use to actually compare and contrast one another to really figure out what's going to be the most useful form of business entity for your new business or for the business that you're looking to create. And so the 5 factors that we're going to focus in on are simplicity, personal liability protection, tax status, ability to raise capital or fundraising, and management flexibility. And so I want to start on the most complex end of the spectrum when it comes to business entities with corporations. And a corporation is basically a group of individuals or a group of companies, or it might be a mixture of both, that are organized at the state level to act as a single entity. And it has a certain corporate structure. All right, so a corporation is required to have a board of directors. The owners of the corporation are the shareholders. Corporation has officers who are in charge of kind of the day-to-day management and running the business. Corporation has certain requirements in terms of maintaining a corporate record book, holding annual meetings and meetings of the board of directors in a certain way that decisions have to be made in terms of larger decisions in terms of the management of the business. Right. And so some of the advantages of the corporate structure is it's the best form of business entity for raising money because you can actually issue shares. And so not only does that make it so that you can issue shares on the stock market long term, but it gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of ownership and what benefits you can give to people for being shareholders. Right. So you can do things like give someone an option to where they can, maybe it's convertible debt, which I'm not sure if we're familiar with the term. I won't explain it in depth because there's too much that we could get into with that. But the idea being that someone could give you a loan that at the end of the day, they could convert into shares in the business, right? That's something that you can do with a corporate structure that you couldn't necessarily do with an LLC. And then also investors If you're looking to pull in third-party investors in your business, a corporate structure is typically going to be best because you can actually, the investor is thinking long-term, how am I going to, what's my exit strategy for this business? All right, and so they want to know that at the end of the day, if the business is successful, it grows, they're going to be able to sell or offer those shares on a public stock exchange, right? Corporation also has personal liability protection for shareholders. We'll get to that in a minute. There's also choice of tax treatment. So a corporation can either be an S Corp or a C Corp. And S Corp has what's called pass-through tax status, which basically means that as the shareholder or the owner of the business, the profits of the business aren't taxed on the corporate level, but they're passed through and reported on my own personal tax returns. And that is the level at which they'll be taxed. Versus a C Corp, which has double tax status. So the corporation pays its corporate taxes on the income it brings in. And then as the income is sent out to shareholders in the form of dividends, then that income is taxed on their personal tax returns as well. So there are situations where that might be beneficial, but that's a question for your tax advisor, not me. So the relative disadvantages of a corporate structure are, number one, the complexity. So as I mentioned, a corporation is the most complex form of business entity. And that really comes with all of the corporate requirements that I mentioned before, with the record keeping, the fact that you have a board of directors that has overall control of the business, that is technically separate from the shareholders. And so the shareholders are the owners of the business, they partake in the profits, but technically they're not the ones who have control over the business. That's the board of directors. And so there are ways as a shareholder to make sure that you're the one who still has control, but there's a little bit more complexity that goes into that in terms of how you structure your bylaws to make sure that you maintain control over the business. And so that's also where the other disadvantage of relatively limited control from a management standpoint comes in, because there's a little bit more flexibility and bending that has to happen in order to make that work for your business long term. So next we have limited liability companies, or LLCs. And I'm sure we've all heard of LLCs. We're all familiar with LLCs, whether you started a business already or you haven't started a business and you're looking into it. LLCs are really the most popular form of business entity that there are. And the reason for that is that it kind of gives you the best of both worlds between a partnership and a partnership or a sole proprietorship and a corporate structure. And what I mean by that is you have the management flexibility that comes with a partnership or a sole proprietorship, where you get to decide how decisions are going to be made within your business through your operating agreement. But you also have the personal liability protection that comes with the corporate structure. And that personal liability protection is a function of the fact that an LLC and a corporation have what's called legal personhood, which basically means that the LLC and the corporation are separate legal entities from you as the owner of those businesses, right? And so because of that, the law is not going to hold you personally responsible. There's almost like a thin wall between the two of you of legal protection. And the law is not going to hold you personally responsible for the debts, liabilities, and otherwise of the business, because it's a separate legal entity from you as an individual. And so that personal liability protection comes in to protect your home, your bank account, your car, the assets that you possess, so that they're not on the line when it comes to debts that belong to the business. An LLC also has choice of tax treatment. So sometimes you might hear that someone, sometimes people get confused because they say I have an LLC, but I'm a sole proprietor. I have an LLC, but I want to be an S Corp. An LLC doesn't have a separate tax treatment under the IRS's code. So LLCs were created after corporations, after partnerships, after sole proprietorships, and they're a product of state law. And so when LLCs were created in the 70s, the IRS said, instead of creating a separate category for tax treatment of LLCs, they're going to be able to choose from having tax treatment of either a corporation, a sole proprietorship if it's a single member LLC, or a partnership if it's a multi-member LLC. And so by default, it's going to be treated as either a sole proprietorship or partnership, and you can elect treatment as an S Corp or even a C Corp. although I wouldn't necessarily advise that, but you can choose, you have that choice of tax treatment with the LLC structure. An LLC can also be a nonprofit, so there's a lot of flexibility there. And then you can also sell a portion of the business to raise money, which is an advantage over a partnership or sole proprietorship, where you can't actually sell an interest in the business in order to raise capital. The relative disadvantages are, number one, the LLC presents a little more complexity than people often tend to realize, because it's so easy to go and start an LLC. Like, you could go on YouTube, figure out how to do it yourself. You could go to LegalZoom, get it done in a couple of minutes. It's really easy to start an LLC, but there's a lot there in terms of what needs to go into the LLC to make it right for you, particularly when it comes to the operating agreement that a lot of people tend to overlook. And one point that I want to make on that is, if you have a multi-member LLC, so if you're starting an LLC and you have business partners, it's absolutely essential that you have a written operating agreement. Essential, all right? So make sure that that's something, if you're not familiar with what an operating agreement is and you have an LLC or you're looking to create one, make sure that you look into and understand what an operating agreement is in terms of the role that it plays in your business. The other relative disadvantage, and this is relative to the corporate structure, is that with an LLC, because you can't issue shares, there's a little bit less flexibility when it comes to being able to raise capital or raise money for the business. So I want to make one note on personal liability protection, because people often get confused about how extensive that personal liability protection is for your business. And the fact is that it is a kind of a veil that will provide you some sort of protection, but it shouldn't be your number one plan for managing risk for your business. And that's one area where a lot of people get tripped up. First of all, it's not going to protect you from your own negligence. So let's say if I have a brick and mortar store, someone comes in and slips and falls, and it's determined that I was negligent because I didn't clean that up, I can still be sued personally because I was personally negligent, right? Like, I didn't do something that I had a responsibility to do. So I can be personally sued, and that personal liability protection provided by the LLC or the corporation will not protect me from that. But the other way, the other main way that that personal liability protection might not protect you is if you are commingling funds, all right? And so this is something that is very simple, but I always make a note of it. And I was talking with Jillian about it earlier. Make sure when you start your LLC or open your business that you open a business bank account. All right, so the process should look like filing your certificate of organization, getting your EIN number, putting your operating agreement together, and then step number 4 is going in and getting that business bank account set up. And there's a checklist here in person. Sorry to everyone who's not here in person. I will try to send out a link to the e-version of the checklist, but for everyone who is here in person, there's a checklist where that is laid out for you, all right? So make sure that as that 4th step, you open that business bank account. It is very important. So, because what can happen is, if you are commingling funds and you end up getting sued, or there's a judgment against you, you default on a loan, a court could look at that and say, well, you are not recognizing the legal difference between the business and you as the individual. You're treating the business bank account like a personal piggy bank. And so we're going to allow whoever it is that has a judgment against you to collect against you, because you're not recognizing the legal difference between the two. We're not going to recognize it either. And we're going to allow this person to collect from your personal assets. All right. So it's a very simple step that people can miss, and that can get you into a lot of hot water. So make sure you open that business bank account. So next we have partnerships. All right. And a partnership is simply 2 folks or 2 businesses that come together and say, we're going to take advantage of a business opportunity that we see. Right. And so with a partnership, and we're talking about a general partnership here, all right? So a general partnership is relatively simple to establish. It gives you flexible management arrangements because that's all worked out in the partnership agreement. But the relative disadvantages are, you have no personal liability protection granted by the business structure. So with a partnership, The folks who are part of the partnership and the business itself are one and the same from a legal perspective. So there's no personal liability protection. There are limited fundraising options because you can't sell a portion of the business or a share of the business, right? You could sell assets that belong to the business. You could merge the business with another business. But if you take on a new business partner in that partnership, it becomes a new partnership. All right. And there's no choice of tax treatment. So a partnership for tax purposes is treated as a partnership. Last but not least, we have sole proprietorships. All right. And I think sole proprietorships tend to get a bad rap from professionals because there's no tax advantages, there's no personal liability protection, and there's the fewest fundraising opportunities. And with a sole proprietorship, you are the business. So when you're a sole proprietor, you and the business from a legal standpoint are one and the same. However, I'm someone who tends to differ with a lot of professionals when it comes to sole proprietorships, because for me, I think that there's a time and a place for everything. And I think that the time and a place for a sole proprietorship is when you're interested in starting a business and you want to venture into it, you want to see what it's like, but you're not sure maybe 2, 3, 4 years down the line, whether or not you see yourself in that business, right? And so a perfect example, I myself started my law firm as a sole proprietor. And for me, it was because I knew that at some point, my wife is in the Army. She was going down to Maryland to start a residency. And I knew at some point, and this was in 2019, I knew at some point I would be moving down there to Maryland with her. But I didn't necessarily know when that would happen, whether I would take the firm with me, whether I would continue to run the firm virtually, or what that would look like. But I knew I wanted to jump out there and do it. So I felt comfortable protecting myself from risk through insurance, through malpractice insurance. And I went and I took the leap and I said, I'm not sure where this is going to go long term, but I know I want to try it out. I know I want to kind of see how it works, and then I'll kind of figure it out as it goes. And then the silver lining of the pandemic for me was finding out that I could be in Maryland, spending most of my time with my wife while still running my law firm virtually. And so that is one of those situations where, because I knew that I would need that flexibility, a sole proprietorship is the simplest form of business entity to start up and the simplest form of business entity to stop. All right. You don't need to get the state's approval to open the business. You may have to register a fictitious name. You may have to open a tax account, right? Like you got to pay your taxes. But you don't have to file a certificate of organization or articles of incorporation or anything like that, which means that when you go to shut the business down, if it doesn't work out, you don't have to do a whole bunch of extra steps in terms of shutting the business down if you decide you don't want to move forward with it. And so for me, obviously, I figured out that I could still run the business virtually. I switched it over to an LLC, which was a little bit of extra hassle, a little bit easier for me than I'm sure it would be for everyone else, because it's what I do for a living. But it was worth it to be able to have that flexibility to say, okay, now I know that I want to move forward with this long term, and to set it up at that point versus trying to do that out the gate. And so that's one of those situations, again, where it makes sense to start as a sole proprietor. So there's a time and a place for everything. And I really just want you to kind of see what is out there and take the time to think through what is going to work best for your business long term. All right. And we spend the most time on this section because it really is the most important aspect of setting a foundation for your business, is what entity you choose. And then those foundational documents, if it's a corporation, the bylaws, if it's a partnership, the partnership agreement. If it is a multi-member LLC or even a single member LLC, the operating agreement. All right, making sure that those are where they need to be will save you a lot of headache down the line in terms of, not needing to change anything and knowing that you're in the right space and in the right place to take advantage of the opportunities that you're pursuing. So really quick, are there any questions in the room about business entities? All right. So again, for those of you on Zoom, any questions you have, feel free to put them in the chat. We're going to try to go through as many of them as possible. I'm going to shift this because there we go. Now I'm a little bit more in the frame. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about business licensing. And business licensing is tricky. It's tricky to talk about business licensing and try to give tips about it because there are so many different types of business licenses that apply to different industries. I can't really kind of give you a step-by-step of how to figure out exactly what's going to apply to you. But I can give you a couple tips and a couple concepts that hopefully will work in terms of helping you to figure those things out. So number one, when you're thinking about figuring out what business licenses will apply to your business, you want to have two things in mind. Number one, where is your business located? And number two, what industry are you in? The answer to these two questions will really determine what business licenses are going to apply to your business. All right, so number one, where you're located, business licensing is typically handled on a local level, in Pennsylvania on the county level. All right, so in Philadelphia, for example, you have to have a commercial activity license, which is a general business license, which is free. It's relatively easy to get. The whole point of it, though, is so that they know who you are, so they know who to expect taxes from come April, right? And so it's a business license that if you're operating in Philadelphia, you have to have it. But there's no such, as far as I'm aware of, no other county kind of has that across the board business license requirement, at least not on our side of the state. All right, and so it's an example of every county is going to be a little bit different. All right, and so where you're located will determine partially what business licenses apply to you, but also what industry you're in. All right, so there are some business licenses that are at the state or the federal level that might apply to your business, depending on what type of business you're in, right? And it's not too hard to think about what those businesses are or what those industries might be, because they're the ones that we think of as being heavily regulated and for good reason, right? So nursing homes, childcare facilities, construction contractors, people who import and export goods, right? Like these are things where the government takes a higher interest because there's either some sort of risk or there's some sort of tax. And so they want to know what's going on with the business, and they want to make sure that the business is properly licensed and everything is in place. Food service businesses, right? And so the industry that you're in will also determine whether or not you're going to have specific business licenses. And that also includes some of the business activities that you're engaging in, right? So the other way to think about business licensing, even though it's not technically a business license, but if you have a brick and mortar store and you want to hang a sign outside of the store, there's going to be a permit for that. You want to make alterations to the interior of the building, there's going to be a permit for that, right? And so these aren't necessarily things that we would maybe typically think of as a business license, but they fall into that category in terms of thinking through the things that you need to do to make sure that your business is operating above board, which is what we're really concerned with when we talk about business licensing, right? So a couple resources when you're trying to figure out what business licenses you need, there's a state website. There's a website with the state. I don't have the exact website. So if you Google it, you should be able to find it, but they have a tool where you can actually go through and it'll create a checklist for your business. The city website has all the information on there. Unfortunately, it's not the best to navigate. So what I would recommend is a lot of the CDCs, so community development corporations in your neighborhood, they're going to have some information that's going to be helpful to you. And they'll be able to kind of help walk you through some of that stuff because they've got an interest in seeing your business be successful. Local elected officials' offices. And there are actually a lot of other resources, and I'm blanking on some of them, but I give a separate presentation every once in a while on business licensing. So if you have questions about what those resources are, you can always feel free to reach out to me and I'll be happy to send you a list. But there are resources out there to help you with figuring out what business licensing requirements you have. All right. So after business licensing, we have what's actually my favorite topic, and that's contracts. And I know that probably sounds weird that like someone would get excited about contracts, but I actually do. I honestly get excited about contracts. The reason is that the way I think about a contract is that you are two people or whoever is involved in the contract, you are creating private law. You're basically creating law that's going to govern your relationship between one another. And I think that that concept is it's so cool to think about the fact that you can create the structure for what that relationship is going to look like from a business standpoint. And it's really important to kind of look at contracts that way, because typically, right, we think about contracts like, oh, if I go to court, I need the judge to interpret the contract and et cetera, et cetera. And what that often leads to is a contract that nobody can really use, not even the judge, to be honest with you, because, you know, the contract's got a bunch of legalese and a bunch of Latin, which no one really reads anymore. And it's supposed to say these things, but literally you could go to court, and this is one of the reasons I hate being in court. You could go to court and you think that the contract means one thing and the judge says, nope, it means this. And that's what it means. And so, not to say that contracts are useless in court. And if you're ever trying to prove anything in court, having it in writing or getting it in ink is the most important aspect of being able to prove something in court, right? You need that contract as evidence. But what I'm trying to say is that while the contract is important from a court perspective, if there's a lawsuit, probably the most important aspect of it is really setting the parameters and the structure for a successful business relationship. And so when I think about drafting contracts, I'm thinking about putting together a document that helps everyone to have expectations about what their obligations are, what they can expect from the other party, and what should happen if there's a disagreement or some sort of issue, right? So it really sets this tone to where we're collaborating now on what should this relationship look like, and we're addressing some potential issues before they even come up. And so contracts are important. They protect you from risk. You know, you can go into court, you can be able to show that to the judge. But like I said, it really forms the backbone of any successful business relationship. And that's even if the contract is just a handshake agreement, that's still a contract. And you still, you know, come to some sort of agreement on what to expect from one another. But it's better to get it in writing so everyone remembers and knows, here is what we put together and here's what we're going to abide by. So contracts with who? Like, who are we talking about contracts with? Pretty much anyone and everyone within your business, right? So there's business partners, there's landlords, there's suppliers, there's independent contractors and employees and customers and people who visit your website, so on and so forth down the line. Basically, anyone who you engage in business with, where there is something being exchanged, something of value being exchanged between one person or one entity and another, whether or not it's in writing, it is a contract once you've agreed to, you know, those essential terms about who is providing what and what they're getting in return. All right, and so it's important to get these in ink. I understand, especially as a new business owner, sometimes you don't. You know, sometimes you don't, but especially when it comes to the most foundational, important contracts in your business, with your business partners, with the folks who will be doing work with you, with your customers, when you're talking about things like refunds and your scope of work, which is really important. One of the things that people often overlook, particularly in service-based businesses, is if I'm providing someone with a service and then they come back to me and say, you know, well, I actually want to change this, or can you do this as well? If you don't have that in writing, or if you haven't kind of laid out what that scope of work is, you're setting yourself up for a very awkward conversation, trying to explain to them why you're not going to do something that they thought that you could also provide. Right? Whereas if you have it in writing, you say, look, I hear what you're saying. I understand that you need this, but in order to do that, it's going to cost you an extra this. And it's right here in your contract that explains what I do and what I don't do. And if you want to add this in, here's what the cost would be, right? So these are all things that we can lay out ahead of time to, again, take advantage of opportunities as they come and feel prepared for them and take them on confidently. So unfortunately, that's all on contracts. But now we'll talk about hiring. And there's one main topic that I want to cover when it comes to hiring, and that's understanding the difference between an employee and an independent contractor. All right, and so it's important to understand the difference between the two. Because oftentimes when someone is starting a business, they want to hire someone as an independent contractor. It feels like the easiest way to go about getting someone to help you out, because you don't have to provide any extra benefits. There's no workers' compensation or unemployment insurance that you have to pay. You don't have to worry about running payroll. They do their own taxes. You don't have to worry about withholding any taxes, all that sort of stuff, right? But what a lot of people don't realize when they set that business up and they hire that first independent contractor is that you saying that that person is an independent contractor doesn't make it so. All right, the law actually determines who can be classified as an independent contractor and who has to be classified as an employee. So that's why this is an important distinction to be aware of. And what it really comes down to is the level of control that you have over that person's work and how they do the work. That's the key factor here, right? And so there are different tests at different levels. I wish I could tell you, and this is one of the unfortunate things about law, is that like at every level, there's a different test and a different factor. It's one of the reasons why I frequently tell people a good lawyer can make the law say whatever they want, because there are so many different tests and so many different case laws and precedents that at any time, someone with a good story and a good argument can totally change what the law says. It's one of the things that we have to deal with. It also brings some benefits. But anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent. The level of control that you have over that person and their work will determine whether or not you can classify them as an independent contractor. And understand this, if you get audited, let's say you get audited by the Revenue Department or the IRS, or the Department of Labor for a workers' compensation or unemployment compensation situation, they're going to assume that anyone working for you is an employee. And the burden rests with you to prove that that person is an independent contractor. All right, and so when we think about what that typical independent contractor relationship looks like, right? It's hiring a painter or a plumber or an electrician. They come into your home office. You tell them what you're looking for. If it's a paint, here's the color that I want. Here's the area that I would like to have painted. If it's a plumber, here's, the sink that's broken or clogged. And they'll say, okay, here's how much I'm going to charge you. Here's what day I could do it. And when they come in, when you negotiate everything, you sign a contract. And when they come in to do the job, you don't stand behind them and say, all right, here's the tools that you should use. And if it's a painter, you don't say, use this brush stroke. And if it's a plumber, you don't say, no, use that wrench there. The one you're trying to use isn't the right one, right? You let them do their job. They have the professional acumen to get the job done without your help. And so that's the quintessential independent contractor relationship. On the other side of that spectrum, right, we have the employment relationship or the employee, where someone comes in, if they're applying for the job, you tell them, here's the job position, here's the description, here's the salary, here is, when you need to be in the office and maybe when you can work from home, here's how many off days, paid time off you get. Here is our employee handbook that outlines our policies. Here's your laptop that you'll be using to do your work, right? And so there's a lot more control over that employee versus that independent contractor. In between those two quintessential relationships is a gray area. And if you are hiring someone as an independent contractor, you want to stay as far away from that gray area as possible. You want to try to be as close to that quintessential independent contractor relationship as you can be. And the one thing that's going to be most helpful with that is if you are hiring someone as an independent contractor, if they have their own business that they run independently, providing the same sort of services that they're providing to you, that's a good safe zone. All right, that is a good safe zone for your business because it shows here is a service that they provide to others. They advertise it and hold it out as they're doing this work for other people, even if they only work with you for a month or whatever the case may be. But they provide this service, they hold themselves out, they have a separate LLC or a separate corporation or whatever the case may be, and they provide this service to other people. And that will be a very important factor in kind of looking at it. But if you have any questions, if you feel like you're in a gray area, always a good idea to ask someone and really figure out whether or not it's one of those situations, because you don't want to find out later. All right, you want to feel comfortable and feel sure now. So last but not least, we have intellectual property. And this tends to be, I feel like, everyone else's favorite topic, which I like intellectual property as well. It is very important because when it comes to your business and the assets that your business owns, for most businesses, unless your business owns real estate, your intellectual property is the most valuable asset that your business owns. All right, and that might be in the form of your brand assets. It might be a secret recipe or your standard operating procedures or a client list. It might be designs or artwork or videos that you produce or music. But your intellectual property is going to be the most valuable asset. And the reason for that is because when you own intellectual property, you have the right to exclude others from using it. And what that means is it gives you a competitive advantage over those who aren't allowed to use that intellectual property. But it also provides an opportunity for you to license that intellectual property and create separate streams of income. And this is the type of income that we all eventually would love to have. It's that passive income. It's that sit back on the beach and sip a nice cool drink while money rolls into the bank account sort of income, right? And that's where we would all love to be, I'm sure. And the way that you're able to, and so a great example of that is my son is 19 months old. He's got about 8.5 teeth, and his little training toothpaste has Paw Patrol from Nickelodeon. It's branded with Paw Patrol. Nickelodeon does not make toothpaste, I'm sure, but they're getting paid off of each bottle of toothpaste that Oral-B sells with Paw Patrol all over it. And so that's a great example for you of how valuable that intellectual property can be and why it's so important to figure out what your IP, what your intellectual property is, and how you protect it. All right. So first and foremost, we'll start with trademarks because this tends to be what folks are most familiar with. And a trademark protects your brand assets, right? So your name, your logo, images, sounds can be included, right? So the sound when you open up your Windows laptop or your Apple laptop, those are trademarks. Colors can even be trademarks, right? And so really what a trademark does is it distinguishes the source of a product or service, and it prevents others from using the same or a similar mark for similar services or similar products, right? So it's all about preventing consumer confusion about the source of a product or service. And this is important to understand because a lot of times people will sometimes think, well, if I get a trademark, no one anywhere ever will be able to use the same or similar business name as me, or will be able to use the design that I put on my t-shirt or anything similar or the same slogan. And really the key question or the test there is whether or not someone else's use of something similar is going to create a risk of confusion in terms of where the source of a product or service is coming from. So it's important to understand that. That's why you can have a Domino's sugar and a Domino's pizza, or a Dove chocolate and a Dove soap, right? Because it's been determined that there's no concern for confusion there because they're in completely separate industries, right? So if you went and started creating like Google t-shirts, that might be kind of difficult because like Google's one of those companies that's taken over everything we do. So Google might, who knows, people might think that Google actually makes t-shirts, right? So in order to have a trademark, in order to have a brand asset that can be protected by trademarks, it has to be distinctive. All right, so there has to be some level of distinctiveness. And the best way that I can put this right is it can't simply be generic. So it can't simply be something that says what I do. or even if it's something that's purely descriptive of what I do, there's less potential protection there, right? So if I run a plumbing business and I name my business The Plumbers, I can't get that trademarked. I can't trademark the term The Plumbers because that is something that people do. It's not something that I can protect. So if I want to get a trademark over my business name, I've got to pick a different business name. Similarly, if you have a candy store and it's called Sweets, you might be able to get that protected by a trademark, but the space around it that's protected is not going to be as wide. It's not going to be as wide a net versus, let's say, Google or FedEx or Yahoo or Coca-Cola. These are words that didn't exist. Well, maybe Yahoo existed, but these are words that weren't in use prior to those companies using them. So there is a very wide net that those brand assets protect, because there is a greater risk for confusion because there isn't anything else that's a Google, or there isn't anything else that's a FedEx, right? So with a trademark, it's also important to understand that once you start using a brand asset or brand element in commerce, you're entitled to some level of protection for it, right? And so if you start, using your business name out there, and you've been using it for 3 years, and someone comes and writes a cease and desist letter and says, you can't use this, I just registered a trademark a year ago, you've got some rights in that brand asset that you've used, and you've got some rights to be able to protect and defend that space that you've created by using it. But in order to really give yourself the full protection, you need to register it with the US Patent and Trademark Office, the USPTO. All right, and that's the best way to ensure that full protection for that trademark. Next, we have copyrights, which are often confused with trademarks, but they're different. And so a copyright protects creative works of authorship, right? So think books, think designs, think artwork, think videos, think music, patterns, code, software code, right? Things that are created. And so in order to receive copyright protection, a creative work has to be original, and it has to be fixed to a tangible medium, which basically means that it's out there in the world where others can verify that it exists. So it's on a piece of paper, it is in the cloud, it's on a laptop, it's a mural on the wall, but it's out there where others can see that it actually exists. And so a copyright prohibits others from copying or displaying the original work, particularly for profit. There are what's called fair use exceptions to that, where others can use copyrighted material for certain things, such as commentary or for educational uses, but it has to be rather limited in terms of how much of that copyrighted work they actually use. All right, and so similar to trademarks, once you create something and it's original, you have some rights to it. Someone isn't allowed to just come and take it. But in order to have that full right, or in order to fully exercise that right and take advantage of all the protections that are actually out there, particularly the ability to sue for copyright infringement in federal court, you have to register for a copyright with the US Copyright Office. All right, and so that's going to be one of the things. If you are a creative entrepreneur, it's going to be essential for you to understand copyrights and make sure that you take the time to get some of your copyrights protected, or get your creative work protected under with a copyright. Next, we have patents. All right, and patents protect new ideas and inventions. All right, and they give you the ability to exclude others from reproducing those new ideas or inventions for up to 20 years. All right, the thing about patents is that they are much different from copyrights and trademarks, and that the first person to file for the patent is the person who becomes the owner of it, right? And so just because I created the invention, I don't have any rights until I go and apply for that patent. So it's very important, if you have an idea or an invention, it is very important that you be the first person to apply for that patent, because that's what's going to grant you protection. Otherwise, someone can steal that idea from you. All right. It's also important in terms of new ideas and inventions, understanding what the requirements are. So it has to be useful. It has to be novel or new, and it has to be non-obvious. All right, and non-obvious basically means that there's a significant enough inventive leap from whatever already exists to what you have created or what you have imagined or created in your mind. All right, and so that would look like if I said I'm going to create a bottle cap that where I reverse the threads and it twists on counterclockwise and twists off clockwise. So it's just reverse of what we would normally expect. And I go to apply for a patent. It's useful, right? The threads are useful. It helps you take the bottle cap on and off. Maybe it's novel. Maybe nobody has ever tried reversing the threads on a bottle cap before. But it's definitely not non-obvious, right? There's no inventiveness. I've just reversed the threading so that it twists on and off in a different direction. All right. So again, you have to file for a patent. If you have a new idea or invention, you have to be the one who actually applies for that patent first, or someone else can slide in and take it. It's one of the reasons why Edison is credited with so many inventions, but someone like Nikola Tesla just has a car company named after him, but he, no benefits other than that, right? Last but not least, we have trade secrets. All right. And I say last but not least, and I mean it, because for a lot of businesses, trade secrets are the most overlooked form of intellectual property, but the most important form of intellectual property. So these are things like secret recipes, customer lists, contact lists, customer data, things like internal operating procedures that really give your a business an advantage in terms of the way it operates and in terms of the way that you find customers. All right. And so basically something is protected as a trade secret if it has commercial value. The business keeps it confidential, so they take steps to make sure that that information is kept confidential. And then if that information is obtained and used without the consent of the business, that is the point at which they could sue for trade secret for trade secret protection, right? And so when it comes to protecting trade secrets, it's not like any of the other forms of intellectual property that we've already talked about, where you go and would register that. Instead, it's protected through contract law and is protected through your operating procedures, right? And so contract law, you use that for non-disclosure agreements or confidentiality agreements, maybe with employees, maybe with business partners, other folks you're working with. But when it comes to those operating procedures, it's making sure that when information as confidential is shared with someone, that they know that it's confidential, that they know that it shouldn't be shared with others who don't have that same level of clearance, so to speak. And also nowadays, where you can share things electronically, you also want to put yourself in a position where you can revoke access to that confidential information whenever you need to, right? So if it's an employee, a business partner, if they're no longer working with you, you can, at the click of a button, take away access to that confidential information and make sure that it's protected. So that brings us to the end of the legal aspects, right on time. But there's one other aspect that I want to touch on, and that's just building a team, right? And so even if you are a solopreneur, a solo entrepreneur, no business partners, you're doing it all yourself, maybe it's an e-commerce business that you're building, still think about what gaps exist in your knowledge and the information and the tools that you have, and who you need to add to your team to be able to help you to build the type of business that you envision. Because business really is a team sport. It really is all about collaboration. And that includes between you and your customers, but also between you and the other folks who help fill in those knowledge and information gaps, and help you to, who are experts in the areas where you're weaker, right? And who can help fill in those gaps for you. So even if you're doing it on your own, think about who you can add to your team in different areas to be able to help you get to the place that you want to go. And maybe it's not necessarily paying that person to be on a retainer, or maybe it's not necessarily paying that person to do something for you now, but it's just knowing that this is the person who I'm going to go to if I have a question. Wink, wink. So, and that building a team is helpful. Again, it helps you avoid mistakes, recognize opportunities, and save time. All right. So think about, always be on the lookout for folks who you enjoy their presence, who are knowledgeable, willing to share the information that they have, and someone who you feel like you can trust that they will, help your business move forward. And I don't know, when I think about folks who I'm working with in terms of building my business, I think about folks where, like, if the contract fails and it doesn't mention anything about this situation, but I ask them to do something that I feel like is just the right thing to do, will they actually do it? Right? Like if it doesn't turn out the way that I wanted it to be, and technically the contract doesn't say, XYZ. If I ask them for a partial refund, will they give me a partial refund? If I ask them to fix something, and it's the 4th round of edits and the contract says only get 3 rounds of edits, are they going to be willing to fix this one little thing because they know that it's something that is important to my business and that they need to get right? Right. So those are some of the ways that I think about choosing folks who I want to add to my team. So I want to end with thank you. I'll check out what questions, because it looks like we've got some stuff in the chat here. But I appreciate everyone who came out in person. Appreciate everyone who's here on Zoom. Are there any questions in the room before I hop to chat?